Good morning. In the last election, we heard a lot about how the top 1% of the people in our country have more money than the rest of us have, right? And we hear that? Top 1%. They're selfish. They keep all this money to themselves and they just hoard it all. And the rest of us just have to make do on scraps. And we got kind of discontented with that, didn't we? I mean, it gets us fed up. I mean, how dare they, the top 1%, hoard that much stuff while the rest of us just have to make do? 7 billion people in the world today. 7 billion people in the world today. 318 million people in the United States. That is exactly 4.5% of the world's population in the United States. And yet, in the United States, we have 45% of all of the wealth in the world in the United States. That means you sitting here in the auditorium today are in the top 1% of the richest people on the planet. Now, the politicians didn't tell you that, did they? They didn't tell you that you were the 1%. I mean, there are people all over this world who are going, how dare they have all that money while we make do with scraps? And in some case, they really are making do with scraps. When was the last time we ate scraps? It's been a long time for me. 78% of all of the world's health resources are in the United States for 4.5% of the world's population. If we get sick, we have a better chance of surviving that illness than anywhere else on the planet. 90% of all of the counselors, treatment programs, and emotional health resources are in the United States. If we have an addiction, if we have a behavior problem, if we have depression, if we struggle, we have more access in the United States, each one of us, than some whole countries have for their entire population. Just under 90% of all Christian songs, Christian books, Christian messages, Christian videos are produced in the United States. We have access, more access, to the message of Jesus Christ than the rest of the world combined. Physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, we are the 1%. We have 1%, we are the richest 1% in any of those categories. And yet they just did this thing, and it's called the Gratitude Survey. And they took the Gratitude Survey and they did it in all of these countries around the world. And basically it was, how grateful are people for the things they have in their life? Guess where we ranked? We weren't bottom, thank goodness, but we were middle of the pack. We were middle of the pack. In fact, there were 8 countries in the top 10 who have less than 10% of the world's resources in each of those categories. And yet they are more grateful for what they have than we as a nation are. Now, that's just kind of confusing. I mean, how can we be in the top 1% of everything, and yet we are not very thankful? We are not very grateful. Well, I think part of it is we have a culture of discontent. In fact, our culture thrives on making us discontent. I got rear-ended, hit my truck, so I had to take it and get it fixed. The other guy's insurance paid great. I'm very grateful for that. But guess what they put me in to drive around while they fix my truck? A brand new truck of the same model as mine. You see, they were trying to breed discontent. They were trying to make me drive that 2016 around and go, wow, man, my 2012 is not near as nice as it was when I brought it in. Trying to breed a little discontent. We look on television. All of the advertising is to breed discontent. It's not going to be very long until New Year's is here. And in New Year's, right after New Year's, you're going to see all of these commercials for taxes, but weight loss. Nutrisystem. All of these things. Weight Watchers. It'll help you have the body you've always wanted. I'm going to tell you, folks, they can't give me the body I've always wanted. I mean, let's be honest. I don't think there's enough Nutrisystem in the world for that. But they breed discontent. Make me unhappy with myself. And then I'll buy their product because their product is going to make me better. And so I take that and I buy it. Earning power. I mean, how many of us, honestly, survey here, how many of us would like to make more money than we make right now? Okay, good. It's pretty universal, right? We all want more than what we have. We are discontent, and lo and behold, if somebody who works in the same place as you do, that does the exact same job as you do, comes up and says, I make such and such, and it's more than you make, all of a sudden, discontent settles in, doesn't it? In fact, you may, until that point, have been believing that you made a great salary. But then when you find out somebody else is making a little more, well, wait a minute. I deserve that too. And the discontent comes in. We get jealous when we think anybody has more. And the king of discontentment, politics. Elect me because everything is awful and I will make it better. Says every politician always. And it's the first promise they always break, right? They breed discontent. They try to get us pitted one against the other. If you're born here, hate the immigrants. Don't like those people who are coming stealing our jobs. Folks, most of the jobs the immigrants do, you and I wouldn't do. If we were paid $1 million, we wouldn't do it. I mean, really, how much would they have to pay you to debone chickens? I'm not sure they could pay me to debone chickens. I've been there and seen it. It's not pretty. They pit races against each other. They pit socioeconomic classes against each other. They pit religions against each other. They pit everything against each other. What? Because if they breed discontent with the status quo, then maybe, just maybe, we'll vote for them to save us. And I kind of got humored at this last election that we were voting evidently between Jesus and the devil. And who was Jesus and who was the devil, depending on which side of the aisle you sat. But there were people who believed that Donald Trump was going to save us and Hillary Clinton, if she was elected, was going to take us straight down. And there were people on the other side who believed the exact same opposite. That Hillary was going to save us and Trump was going to take us down. And the truth of the matter is that discontent was bred into the system. We were sold the fact that we should not be happy. How many actions in this world have people taken because they said, God would want me to be content? I'm going to do this. I know it doesn't sound like it's what I should do. I know it doesn't look like what I should do, but I'm going to do it because God would not want me to be discontent. God would want me to be content. You see, discontentment is the number one thing that keeps us from being thankful. When we are discontent, we start looking at what we don't have. And sometimes the what we don't have is really, really ridiculous. I mean, when you look at it in the grand scheme of things. And I was working on this message this morning, and the sneaky little raccoon got me. The devil sent the raccoon to breed discontentment in me. Because what the raccoon has evidently done is chewed through the satellite cable. And so I went to record my beloved Pittsburgh Steelers football game. and it says, no signal found. And I'm sitting there going, how am I going to be content, Lord, in this situation? And then I reminded myself, I can't even remember who won the Steelers-Browns football game 2 years ago, so probably in 2 years, this will not matter. And this too will pass. And so instead, I'll probably take my wife to lunch, which will be much better than sitting watching a football game if I can focus on not living in my discontentment over what I had anticipated my afternoon would be like. Discontentment gets us all the time. If you go to Philippians chapter 4, and starting in verse 10, Paul knew all about contentment and discontentment. And Paul had been through a range of experiences in his life. You see, Paul, as a young man, evidently from what we can gather in the Scripture, he was from a pretty wealthy family. They had money. He had privilege. He had good schooling. He was the top 1%. He lived in an affluent city. He had an affluent family. He got an affluent education. And then as he got to midlife, he was respected. And he started to become a leader within the Jewish community to the degree that they gave him the responsibility of tracking down Christians and trying Christians and even putting Christians in jail for their threat to the Jewish way of life. In fact, Paul had everything to be content about when he was Saul until he met Jesus. And he met Jesus on the road, and he talked to Jesus, and then he realized what was missing from his life, and he became a follower of Christ. And after he became a follower of Christ, his life kind of changed. Those very people who respected him, guess what? They didn't respect him anymore. That affluence that he had, those people who thought he was something, he didn't have that anymore. Guess what he had to do? He had to start working with his hands, making tents. As he walked, those very people who had given him responsibility now decided he was the problem. And they beat him. And they stoned him. Even when he traveled, he couldn't get a break from the weather, because he was shipwrecked multiple times. All of this happening, all of this occurring over and over again. But Paul, when he writes to the Philippians, starting in verse 10, says, "But I rejoice in the Lord greatly, that now at last you have revived your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned before, but you lacked opportunity. Not that I speak from want, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know how to get along with humble means, and I know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I've learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Nevertheless, you have done well to share with me in my affliction." You see, Paul says that he appreciates the gift they sent as much for their benefit as his, because he uses this phrase, I have, what's the next word? Learned. I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I find myself. I have learned to be content. Contentment wasn't automatic. It wasn't something that Paul woke up one day and goes, woo, I'm content. This is easy. Now, learning to be content means if I'm going to learn to be content in humble circumstances, guess where I have to go? I got to go to humble circumstances, don't I? Now, I can be rich and say, man, if I was poor, I'd be happy. It's no big deal. No, you can't learn to be happy when you're poor unless, guess what? You're poor. All right? You can say, oh, well, I'm going to learn to be happy when I'm stressed, even if there's no stress. No, you can't. You have to learn to be content in those circumstances. So you go to those places and you learn how to be content in those places. And that's what Paul says. He says, I've gone to these places. I've had almost nothing, and I learned to be content there. I've had a whole lot, and I've learned to be content there. I have been hungry, and I've learned to be content there. I have been full, and I've learned to be content there. Now, I will tell you, it's a whole lot easier for me to be content full than hungry. How about you? The learning curve is not so hard on the side when we realize how blessed we've been. When I'm full, when I'm rich, when everything's going well, easy to be content. When I'm hungry, when I'm poor, when things aren't going well, harder to be content. That's why Paul says, I have learned to be content. You see, we sometimes come into this whole attitude of thankfulness and think thankfulness is just something that happens. That God will give me a blessing and I'll thank Him and that's great. And we don't realize that our thankfulness to God should not depend on the circumstances in which the devil places us. You see, just because Satan throws something at us does not mean I need to cease to be thankful to God. I need to learn to be thankful to God because I know something. Because I have understood something. Because what I understand is it's not my strength that lets me endure the hard times. It's not my strength that gets me through when things aren't exactly like I want them. It's God's strength. And God will give me that. Why does Paul say? I can do what? All things. I can do all things through Him who strengthens me. That's the source of my contentment. You see, my contentment is not in my circumstance. If I learn that my contentment is not in the circumstance, that my contentment is in the power of Jesus, then whatever comes along, I can be content. Because the power of Jesus doesn't leave. It doesn't leave when I'm hungry. It doesn't leave when I'm full. It doesn't leave when I'm poor. It doesn't leave when I'm rich. It doesn't leave if I'm 1%. It doesn't leave if I'm at the bottom of the 99%. The power of Jesus is there. How many of you have ever been to a third world country? It's an amazing experience, isn't it? It's an amazing experience. If you have never been to a third world country and seen how the majority of our planet lives, it is a sobering thing to do. Because we take so much for granted. And to go and to see how excited people in these countries are over things that we never even think about. When was the last time you wondered if you would have water? In fact, you know what I've heard this week several times? Well, I just don't like water. I have to drink something else because I just don't like drinking water. There's a bunch of the world that would say, give me your water. You know, I'll take your water. We don't have it. Look at how many times do we think about that? We don't. How many times do we think about whether if we're really sick we can go see a doctor? I mean, if nothing else, I don't have insurance, but I can go to the emergency room, can't I? Because guess what? At the emergency room, what do they have to do? They have to take it, don't they? You got access to medical care right here. Now, some of us have had health problems, right? And in those health problems, it's hard to be content and go, I don't feel good, but yay, there's a doctor. It's learning to be content. It's learning to understand that whatever I'm going through, the strength of Jesus Christ takes me through it. And then I can be thankful. Orville asked us what we were grateful for. He asked us what we were thankful for. And we named some things we were thankful for. And they were great things. But none of us said, I'm grateful for the struggles I've been through. None of us said, well, I'm grateful that God kept pushing me down until I accepted Him. None of us said, I'm grateful that I woke up one day and said, I need to change my life. I need to be better. But those are things to be grateful for too. You see, our gratitude should come in all circumstances. Now, I want to take this one step further, and I think this applies not just to our relationship with Jesus. I think this applies in every relationship we have. Why is thankfulness so important? Why is contentment so important? Well, contentment breeds gratitude. If I am content, then I have gratitude. I am thankful. So if I'm content in my marriage, guess what? I'll be thankful for that spouse I have. If I'm content in my job, I will be grateful for my employer and what they provide me. If I am content in any endeavor of my life, if I can learn to be content in it, then I can have gratitude towards those people who provide that, and ultimately towards God. Now, that's just the first step. Because guess what gratitude does? Guess what thankfulness does? It breeds faith. Thankfulness breeds faith. When we are thankful and when we are grateful, we begin to trust more and we begin to believe more. When I am content in my relationship with my spouse and I am grateful to my spouse for the many ways they improve my life, then I begin to trust my spouse to do what? To improve my life more, to make my life even more full. When I am grateful for my employer and I'm thankful for what they do, I begin to trust my employer more. One big place discontent comes in is in the church, isn't it? Satan's not above using the church. Well, I just don't like that preacher. I wish he wouldn't come back. Or, well, if the elders would just do this, or if we would just see that, or, well, you know, that John Chadwell sits behind me and he sure can't sing. I wish he would just keep it down a little bit. I'm not very content with his voice. Discontent comes into the church. But when we have contentment in the church and we have gratitude for what the church family we're in provides, all of them from top to bottom, then we begin to trust that our church family will provide more. Because contentment breeds gratitude. Gratitude breeds faith. But we're not done yet. Because guess what faith does? Faith breeds relationship. When we begin to believe and to trust, it breeds relationship. So, let's take our marriage again. I learn to be content in my marriage relationship. And I become thankful for what my spouse provides that fulfills my life, that makes my life better. Hopefully that I'm reciprocating. And then I begin to trust and believe that my spouse will do that continually. Then how does that impact my relationship? Well, I just grow closer, don't I? I grow closer to my spouse. My employer, I am content with my job. I am thankful for what they provide me. I begin to believe that my employer cares about me and wants to have a good relationship with me, and it builds my relationship with them. And that relationship grows. So contentment breeds thankfulness. Thankfulness breeds faith. Faith breeds relationship. And relationship, in the context of God, breeds salvation. You see, when I am content, I become grateful to God for what He has done and continue to do in my life, whatever my circumstances are. And when I am grateful and thankful to God, it breeds a belief and a faith that God will not abandon me no matter what my circumstances are. And when I have that faith in God that He will not abandon me, it breeds a relationship. And that relationship ensures my salvation. That relationship cements my salvation. It starts with contentment. So if Satan knows that, guess what he wants more than anything else? Discontent. He wants me to be discontent. He wants me to be discontent with my material blessings. He wants me to think I don't have enough. What I have is not good enough. Whatever happens to me is bad. He wants me to be discontent in my relationships. He wants me to be discontent in my health. He wants me to be discontent in my emotional being. He would love nothing more than if we were physically, mentally, materially, and emotionally and spiritually discontent. Because if we are discontent, we do not have gratitude. And if we do not have gratitude, we do not build our faith. And if we do not build our faith, we do not build our relationship. And if we do not build our relationship, our salvation becomes perilous. Discontentment is the seed that starts all of that. I would dare say, and don't get me to say that I do this perfect. Those of you who know my story know I have not done this perfect, and I do not do this perfect. There are several, in fact, tomorrow's Monday, and Mondays are typically the days I'm least content. How many of you are like that? So I have to work on that. But speaking from personal experience, I think the demise of most marriage relationships starts when the seed of discontentment is planted. When we believe that what we have is not what we deserve, and therefore we become discontent. And then we see nothing in the other person that we are thankful for. In fact, we see everything that we are unthankful for. And as we begin to talk and think and focus on what we're unthankful for, we begin to believe that it is never going to get better and it's never going to improve and there's nothing that can help. And when we believe and have that lack of faith that it could ever change, the relationship goes away. And the relationship is not saved. It's gone. And sometimes it just starts as a very small seed of discontentment. Just a small one. We have been the most blessed and continue to be the most blessed people in the world. We are the 1%ers. Materially, emotionally, physically, and spiritually, you and I are the most blessed. And if we believe in God and in Jesus Christ, we ought to be the most content people in this world. But it doesn't come naturally. It didn't come naturally to Paul. He saw Jesus on the Damascus Road and he still had to learn to be content. He said he was an apostle and he still had to learn to be content. He could do miracles and he still had to learn to be content. So if Paul had to learn to be content as an inspired writer of Scripture, guess what? You and I got to learn to be content. And when we learn it, that contentment will breed gratitude. That gratitude will breed faith. And that faith will breed relationship. And that relationship will take us home to heaven. And guess what we get to do in heaven? You know what we do in heaven? We say thank you all day long, every day, for eternity. I mean, that's the picture that's painted, that all we're going to want to do is stand around and tell God, thank you, thank you, thank you, all day long. Because when that relationship and that salvation has its full circle, we will wake up and we will realize that no matter what the circumstances were that led us to heaven's door, no matter what the life was that got us to God, and no matter what happened in our life that made us broken so that we could be saved, we will realize that we are thankful for every bit of it. And that we can praise Him through eternity for everything. So as we go into Thanksgiving, whether you have turkey or tofu turkey, be content. Whether the dressing is dry or wet, be content. Whether your team wins or loses on the television, well, that's a hard one for me, but be content. As you sit around, just think about what God has brought you through to this point, what God will bring you through the rest of your life, and thank Him for everything that has happened in your life that has made you want to know Him. Because that contentment will help you be more His person than you were before. We have some folks who will be standing at the back as we sing this song. And the first step of thanking God is to say that you understand what He's done for you. That you get it. That you know that the sacrifice of Jesus Christ was given just for you. It was given specifically for you. Oh, but it was given for the whole world. Yes, but it was given just for you too. I can't help but believe that when Jesus died on the cross, He didn't know each of our names. And that's where contentment starts. For God loved you so much, He sent His only Son to save you. His one and only Son, that we might find contentment in this world and true contentment in the next. So if you need to give your life to Him, do so while we stand and sing.